One of the things that really impressed me about Mrs. Warco's witness about Jesus being the center of our school is also how, in general, through this vision cast that we're doing, we're talking about making Jesus the center of everything, right? The center of our school, the center of our staff, our volunteers, the center of our architecture, as the Eucharist in the tabernacle will be front and center for the first time. So it's very impressive, and I was really struck by Mrs. Warco when she said, Jesus becomes the center at St. Walter's School through students letting Jesus into their hearts and allowing him to be their minds, words, and actions. I thought that was a pretty deep statement, a beautiful statement. This statement reminds me of a talk that I went to a couple of months ago at our diocesan headquarters in Crest Hill for Priest Day. We have Priest Day every 2 years here in the diocese, where all the priests of the diocese get together, and we have several speakers there, and we get to listen to different talks. And so this year we had to sign up online, and we were given many choices for different talks, and my first choice was for evangelization. That to me was the most important one that I wanted to hear the most. And when I arrived at the Blanchette Center, I was happy because I got my first choice. And it was kind of funny because I accidentally signed up online twice, so I got the first choice twice. So I got to see the talk I wanted to hear the most twice, and I took some great notes, because evangelization really is everything, right? It's inseparable from Christianity itself. And what struck me about the talk probably the most was the actual definition of the word evangelization. It's one of those nebulous words that if you randomly walked up to a Christian and asked them what it meant, would be kind of hard to define. And over the years, I've heard many definitions of what evangelization is, and most of them are pretty bad. But the one that I heard at this talk was the best one I ever heard, and I'd like to share that with you today. It says, evangelization means bringing the good news of Jesus into every human situation and seeking to transform individuals and society by the divine power of the gospel itself. I love that. Bringing the good news into every human situation. And it is not our power that does this, but the power of the gospel itself through us. And this definition, my brothers and sisters, basically means making Jesus our center in every human situation by allowing Jesus to be our minds, our words, and our actions. For this is the only transformation that can transform society and the world. And we can think of evangelization as an experience of Jesus that sets our hearts on fire and transforms them. And this is kind of like falling in love with Jesus, if you will. And so very naturally, the thing that we love the most becomes our center. Does that make sense? The thing that we love the most becomes our center. And this is true in the spiritual realm as well as in the natural. For example, have you ever met someone who absolutely loves baseball? Right? It's the center of their life. They basically know everything about it. They know the teams, they know the history, the statistics, the RBIs, the batting averages, where the players are from. They know everything about it. And it's the center of their life. And if you run into this person, it only takes a few minutes to realize that they're absolutely into baseball, because this is what they love the most. You go to their house, and you'll see it in their house right away. You'll see it in everything about them. And the reason they know so much about baseball is because they love it. We don't know a lot about things we don't love. Does that make sense? Right? When we meet someone and we fall in love, what do we want to do? We want to know everything about them as quickly as possible. So this is an analogy of evangelization, and it is actually how our faith is supposed to be. When people meet us, they should very quickly be able to tell that Jesus is the center of our lives by how we speak, how we behave, how we act. It should become clearly evident immediately. And so there is nothing wrong with loving baseball, sports, business, our jobs, our careers, or even ourselves. However, these things should never be the absolute center of our lives because they are not God. It's really that simple. They are not God, and we shouldn't make idols out of them. For we were created by God for God. As St. Augustine once said, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." In the gospel today, we see the disciples going off center and Jesus bringing them back to himself. We hear that they are arguing amongst themselves about who is the greatest among them. And Jesus sees this and sits down with the disciples to have a little talk with them. And he says to them probably what they did not want to hear. He said, "If anyone among you wants to be first, he must be last of all, and he must be the servant of all." In other words, he must be like me, he's saying. I must be your center. As Jesus once said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. So having Jesus at our center always leads to service. And so the disciples learn very quickly that it's not about their egos and ambitions for power and prestige, but about being transformed by Christ and about having the mind of Christ, the words of Christ, and the actions of Christ in our lives. And this whole scene when they're arguing is very early in their journey. They don't really know Jesus at this point. In their minds, they think that Jesus is going to be an earthly king, a ruler, kind of like King David. And they're all jockeying for positions of power. You know, they want positions in the government. They want those cabinet posts or positions within the king's court, if you will. But Jesus shows them another way. Jesus shows them that they must make him his center. They must become transformed by him. And this leads to a totally different way of perceiving themselves, of perceiving their purpose, of perceiving life itself for the disciples. And this process of change of mind and heart is what we call evangelization, the very purpose of everything we do as Christians. And so today's gospel, my brothers and sisters, invites us to make Jesus our center. And we know this has happened when nothing else is occupying that space. This is what we hear in our reading from James today. He says, "Beloved, where jealousy and ambition exist, there is disorder and every false and foul practice." This is what it looks like when we are off center. James continues, "Where do wars and difficulties among you come from?" He says, "You covet, but do not possess. You kill and envy, but you do not obtain. You ask, but you do not receive, because you ask wrongly and spend it on your passions." In other words, sometimes we could ask God for things to fill our center that only serve to leave us more restless, dissatisfied, and unfulfilled, because what we're doing is actually going against our nature. We were created by God, for God, and if he's not our center, we're going against the very thing we were created for. So it's no wonder we're restless. It's no wonder we will never have peace. It's no wonder that nothing is ever going to satisfy us. And so may today's Eucharist, the center and summit of our faith, help us to make Jesus the center of our lives. And we can do this by simply inviting him into our hearts and by removing anything in our lives that separates us from him. For only then will we be transformed and equipped to bring the good news of Jesus into every human situation and transform society and the world by the divine power of the gospel itself.